everybody. In today's tutorial, I'm going to talk about UVs. Now, I'm not going to cover everything. It's not going to be exhaustive, but I am going to try and get through as much as I possibly can and discuss my basic workflow for UVing just about any object in 3D. We have this ohm. This is the character that I'm going to be unwrapping. And basically what I'm building is I'm building a scene, an environment from the movie Nausicaa. So if you've never seen that movie before, it's pretty awesome. It's a Miyazaki movie. And these big giant bug creatures are called ohms. And in this universe, the bugs actually act as like a resource for the different characters that live in that world. So if you take a look at our thing here, we're going to go ahead and break this down and we're going to UV it. Now, I'm not as concerned about LODs. There's some measure of remeshing and things like that I could do, but for this project, I'm less concerned about that. I did want to point out that I took the interiors of this and cut them out, so we're not wasting space in our UV shells and wasting UV space. The interior is pretty hollowed, and so this should help as well. And so, yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll walk through this. But before I do, I kind of want to talk a little bit about what UVs are and how they function. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this and show an example from one of my other projects, which is the Mega Man Legends X project. And so if you look at this here, we have a Zakabon. This is one of the Reaver bots in the game. And essentially, he's been UV'd, he's been textured, he's all ready to go. So what UVs are is they're basically like candy wrappers on a piece of candy. So if you think about how a candy wrapper wraps around a piece of candy and you can put any kind of design you want on the wrapper, that's sort of how they work. You can also think about it like a t-shirt. So if you have a t-shirt and you lay out what that t-shirt looks like flat as a textile, you can then print things onto those different sides before the shirt is even put together and stitched together. So if you look at it in the context of our UV editor, you can see that this object has 4 UDIMs. A UDIM is essentially the space between each quadrant has a 0 to 1 unit, and so between each integer here you have a new let me see, can I demonstrate this? Let's see, here we go. You have a new tile, and so in this case we have 4 UDIM tiles, and these are being utilized for very specific reasons in which which I'll explore a little bit later in the tutorial. So as you can see here, we have this guy right here. I'm going to go and turn that off for the sake of being able to see. And you can see we have the main UVs are done between the 0 to 1 ratio. Now, if you're doing something in games, you're going to want your UVs to be optimized within 0 to 1, and that means your resolution is going to have to match to that as well. So a lot of games will use about 2K resolution. In my case, I kind of build everything at 4K and then downsample as needed. And so in this instance, this is just a 4K map, but you can see that I've taken one side here, and that one side has been distributed in here. And then I've taken all the other subsequent sides, and they're in the exact same position as this side, just in a different UDIM. And the reason for that is when you bring this into Substance Painter or an authoring program to do textures, if they're overlapping and you try to bake mesh maps, you will get errors. So if I were to take this just as a demonstration and take all these UVs and transform them over, you can see they actually perfectly align up with the other with the one beneath it, and it's the same for all of these. And so that by doing it this way, that whatever texture appears over these duplicated objects, they will be identical on all of them. But by doing it this way, I can actually paint on this without worrying about the texture affecting the later downstream regions. So you can see a clean texture map should be free of junk. It should look blue all the way across, at least in Maya. This shows that the direction of the texture is correct, that you're not suffering from flipped normals or flipped surfaces. So if I took this, for example, and I went ahead and I flopped this, Let me go ahead and flip it real quick. You'll see that it turns red, and that means that the direction of this texture is not correct. And a demonstration of that, to just kind of further drill that home, if I were to put my my UVs here in front of some text, you'll notice that the text actually reads backwards. And that's because our UVs are also backwards. So the objective there should always be to make sure that you have clean UVs, you have a nice even texel density, so that way all your pixels are around the same size based off of your texture map. And then you should have great success in kind of bringing everything together. Typically, you put more texel density or more pixels in the places that you want more attention to detail. So an example of this would be something like Fallout, a game like Fallout, where you meet an NPC and you notice that their hand textures and their face textures are a lot higher resolution than, say, their underbody body textures cut off at the neck. There's a seam you'll notice there, and it's pretty garish. But the whole purpose for that is to save memory resources, because you're never going to really be looking at the underbody, and their goal is to make sure that the face is as expressive as possible. So without further ado here, let's go ahead and I'll go ahead and hide this. Let me go to my reference editor, and I'll just turn that off. Okay, and we'll turn on the low poly ohm so we can get a sense of this thing. So I've placed a custom, this is a custom UV checker, and what it does for me is it gives me a little more information than the default one that you get out of here. So this one is fine. It does give you a text, and it does give you the boxes, but it doesn't give you direction, and it doesn't give you a letter on every box like this, like the custom one that I have here does. So I'm going to use the custom one as a sort of benchmark to know when my textures are in the correct place. And if you take a look, I'm going to turn this on here to make life a little easier. If you take a look at my textures here, you can see they are a mess. They are not clean at all. Everything is disastrous, and you can see that both just by looking at the UVs and by seeing how the texture is displayed on the surface. So these are all things that must be fixed in order for me to do this. Now this object is really big, so I'm probably going to require a couple of different texture maps. But before I do any of that organization, I'm not even going to concern myself with that. I'm going to make sure that I can have all of it in one 0-to-1 space, nice and neat. Okay, so to start that process off, I always use a projection. If you notice that any of these, when you click on them, if they have UVs, looks like this one doesn't even have UVs, but if they have UVs, let's find something that does, you'll notice that they have multiple shells. So if I go in here and I move this around, I have different shells, and these shells are broken up in such a fashion that really kind of messes things up. It's not giving us a whole lot of information on what it is. The control's kind of messy, and if you take a look at what it looks like here, you can see how it's broken up. So you'll have parts of it that will be kind of broken in spots, and you'll actually see that visibility here when you have the UV editor open. So I'm going to go ahead and do my method, and the method I like to do, so I'm going to isolate this so you can see what this piece looks like. And the method that I like to do is I like to project to bring all the shells together into one simple shell. So I'm going to hold down Shift, right click, go to Mapping, Planar Map, Option Box. And when this opens up, you'll see that you have the camera, keep image width height ratio, and insert projection before deformers. This is my default, and this is what I use for basically everything, because once I hit this button, you're going to notice that it brings it all into one shell. We got rid of all that weird stuff, and now this object's ready to be unfolded and made whole. So if I go to my if you're curious about how to find that without using the Shift right click menu, and you don't want to use Shift right click, you can also go up to UV in the modeling menu set, go up to UV and go to planar mapping options, and it'll give you the same exact controls. So that's just two ways to do it. Okay, so now that I have this projected, I'm going to go ahead and right click, go to UV, and then I'm going to select all that, and I'm going to unfold. And there you go. So now this object has been unfolded, and if I go ahead and turn on my my thing here, you can see that it is much cleaner. There's no issues now, and the seams are virtually seamless at this point. So after unfolding it, you right click, shift, unfold. You can do that, or you can go down to here in your toolkit here, and you can say unfold, and you can hit that optimize and unfold button. And optimize works great for kind of relaxing meshes that tend to get kind of bunched up over time. And there's a few other things you can do. So I use this, as mentioned earlier, I use control UV shell, control right click to UV shell, but you can also use UV shell here and select it. And so I'm going to go ahead and rotate this like that. And then another thing you could do is if you select an edge that you know is supposed to be vertical and hold down shift right click, you can say orient shell to edges, and it will snap it to I believe a right angle. So you'll go ahead and get a nice straight line here. Okay, so this pretty much runs the length of the entire creature. So we know for a fact that this is about the resolution we're going to get if we decide to keep the resolution for the whole thing. Since our objective is to put it into one 0 to 1 slot, I'm actually going to go ahead and just make this match the size of the width and height as best as I can. So that way we have this nice clean layout here for this particular object. And now that I have this, I'm going to go ahead and go to transform on this UV toolkit. I'm going to hit get, and it's going to give me this number right here. So this number is your texel density. It's the pixels per unit of measurement in your scene. So in my case, this is a really big object, very, very big object. In fact, you can see just about how big. If I put up my human scale reference here, you can see the ohms are rather large. But basically the objective of this is to figure out what resolution I need. Obviously this number is pretty small, but by getting this number and storing this number, I'm going to make myself a little bit easier. I'm going to say 0.07, and I'm going to hit set. And what that does is it made it a little bigger. I need to make sure I'm not overlapping these lines. It looks like I'm safe. You can also check that by clicking this button here, and that will give you a little more. It'll let you know. So if you are overlapping the lines, it will drift into the other quadrants. So if I go up and turn that on, you'll see it's actually drifting into the quadrants here. So it will update. So if you're good and you have this turned on, then you'll know that you're in good shape. Okay, so we have this. We now have a set size. So now everything we UV has to be this size. So I'm going to go ahead and go for those low-hanging fruit. I'm going to grab these eyes. So obviously the eye shape, these are kind of these domes, half domes. I'm just going to make this really easy on my life, and I'm going to go ahead and select the object, right-click, mapping, planar map. And you'll see that they've all been put here. Right-click, UV, select all of them, and go ahead and click unfold. Give it a second to think, and once it's done, you'll notice that it is nice and rounded. All of these have been flattened out. Now, I almost always will hit optimize a couple times after I hit unfold, just to kind of make sure everything's sort of smoothed out. And then once I've got that, I need to make sure that they're the same texel density as the other objects that are finished. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my transform again and hit set for all of those UVs. And this now gives us a even keel for the entire, for all the objects that are in here, which means we have the front eyeballs and we have the back eyeballs, and now they're all the appropriate space. So you can do a couple things to arrange these if you don't want to deal with, them. If you don't want to manually move them, you can, and I often do manually move them. But if you don't want to manually move them, you can select all of them here, and you can go down to your align and snap or arrange and layout. And by doing align and you can align things in different ways, but if you want to just kind of orient or stack or unstack the shells, a lot of times I'll just hit orient, stack, unstack, and that will kind of give me, you know, a pretty close approximation. Sometimes I'll hit set just to double check. But yeah, you can see now we have all of these kind of clustered together, and they're not so disparate and scattered. And if you're happy with that, you know, you can work with that. Now, here's another little nifty trick that I like to do. So when they get stacked like this, they should be okay. But if you're worried about pixel bleed, one thing that I like to do is I will make these a little bit larger. So I'll scale them just a little bit. Oops. I'll scale the actual UVs just a little bit, like that. And then I'll reset them. And you'll see it'll shrink them down and give me a little bit larger padding around each piece, which is pretty helpful if you're trying to properly put these in, you know, put these in your scene. So, okay, we're happy with that. These are the right size. So we're going to go ahead and move those to the side as we continue. I'm going to do the same thing with this one. I'm not going to move it too far because I know we kind of want it along the edge there. But we now have two objects here and that are looking pretty good as far as their UVs are concerned. And if we now get rid of that pattern here and we take a look at what these UVs are doing, you can see they are much more manageable. They look like they're working appropriately and they're giving us kind of the right look. So they're facing the right direction. You can read this, the legibility of this is good. And their distortion is pretty minor. There's not a whole lot of distortion, meaning these squares look like squares. They don't look super bent or warped. Obviously, they're going to bend on bent surfaces, but you want to make sure that they remain mostly intact and not super warbly, because if they are warped, then your textures will also look warped. Okay, so now we've got that. Let's go ahead and move on to the next piece. So I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of these, and then we're going to talk about these guys here. And then once we talk about that, I'll probably move into a time lapse so that we can cover the rest of it through a time lapse. But first, let's go ahead and grab the front. And so you can see here the inside is hollow, which makes my life pretty easy because we already, or actually we didn't do projection on these. So let me go ahead and do a projection. So we'll select it, go to projection mapping. There you go. And then right click UV. Right click shift, unfold, unfold. Okay, and then if we take a look at what this object looks like without doing anything else, and we take a look at what it looks like, you can see that our UVs are now looking so much better. And they even wrap around the corner a little bit so that they're not distorted too much. So you can see there's some distortion happening right here. And this is kind of what's going to happen when you have pillowed objects like this. So I'm going to go ahead and select these UVs. I'm going to optimize them. And you're going to see as I optimize them, it's going to relax certain areas and create tension in other areas. So after I've made that tension point there, now I need to figure out, okay, well, this is kind of working and there's parts that are kind of not working. So I could leave it like this. And given the fact that my object is pretty bumpy and forgiving as far as the texturing is concerned, I could theoretically leave it like this and it would not be an issue. But if I want to reduce some of that tension, one thing that I can do is I can go here and I can try and find where the best tension release points are. And I might get some sawtoothing. But I can select those edges here, which happen to be right over here. And I'm going to hit right click, shift, cut. You can also find it in here, cut and sew. You can use your cut tools here. I'm a big fan of the hotboxing menus, right click menus. They make things go very, very quickly. Okay, so I'm going to keep going here. We found that one. These were based off of cube-like objects, so you can see they have these pinch points here. So I'm going to go ahead and find that edge flow, and I'm going to cut it again. I'm going to do it to all four corners of this this shell here. So let's go ahead and go into here. We'll find a good spot. I think that's it right there. Okay, we'll go ahead and cut that one. And one more. and cut. Oh. Cut. Okay, now if I go like this and I unfold, you can see it released all that tension along those points there, and it also made our unwrap here significantly better. So you can see now we're getting a lot less tension pulling along those areas. Everything's feeling quite nice. So I'm gonna go ahead and optimize this. That way it relaxes the tension as much as possible. And I just press it a bunch of times until I feel like, okay, that's good enough. And now that we have our shell, this is our completed shell, we're gonna go ahead and we are going to set it to the proper size. And I'm going to go and throw that with an orient. So to orient something, you can right click, grab an edge, grab one that you're pretty confident is a vertical edge or a horizontal edge, and hold shift, right click, orient shell to edge. And there you go. You'll get something pretty close. And then now you can place this somewhere over here. Since we're going to focus on our 0 to 1, we're not too concerned about where that is right now. We just want to make sure that the shell's done. So now if we go back and we take a look at our scene, hey, look at that. That looks very nice. That looks very nice. And note that the squares are the same size. And that's what you want. You want the squares to match because that will give you the proper texel density for all of these guys. All right, so now let's do a new thing here. We're going to try doing one of these guys. So these mandible things here, these are basically, let me go ahead and switch that on. These are essentially duplicates. They're the same exact model. They've been pushed and pulled a little bit in different ways, but they haven't really changed in their capacity. So one thing that did change is that when I was modeling this, I did end up using a Z remesher because my initial sculpt had these a lot denser. So, and obviously these are pretty dense just by themselves, so these could clearly be cleaned up for sure. But I'm not too concerned about that right now, as this is just a set piece and these don't need to deform or anything like that. So let's go ahead and make some adjustments here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select an area in general that I feel is not going to be impacted too much by the cut. So I want to basically find a place to hide my seam. Let me go ahead and go to Planar Map. There we go. So now I have UVs. I actually didn't even have UVs there for a second. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab one of these again, and I'll hide the rest. And we'll go ahead and we'll UV this. So get rid of that there. I'm just trying to show everything. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and do this, and it looks like this actually runs pretty much down to the end. Let's see. That's a pretty good cut line, if this will work. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to remove the excess lines here. From this point down. Okay, and then I usually hit 4 on the keyboard to double check where that line is, make sure I'm not getting any extras. So my selection's clean. All right, and then shift, cut. Okay, UV or shell in this case, and I'll move this over here. And now I can unwrap this. So using this method, all this really is just about finding points that you want to create your seam and then picking exactly where you want that seam to be and then cutting it and unfolding it. You can optimize a couple times afterward just to help relax some of those tension points. And in many, many, many cases, you'll see and you'll find that this works really well and is really easy to use. and will get you by in most situations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop talking, and I will run through this as a time lapse, and I will see you guys on the other side when the UVs are completed. Okay, so I've now stopped the high-speed time-lapse here, and I've decided to stop here to talk about a few different things. So you can see here we've now UV'd the ohm. We've also taken all the UVs and we put them into one nice package in this 0 to 1 framework. So rather than go through and try and re-UV all the same things on this side, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take this object, mirror it, and then move these UVs down one level. And by doing this, that means that all the textures that live here will still exist on this surface, but they will share the same texture maps. So this technique works best if you're only planning on reusing the same geometry and you don't feel like having unique textures on all these elements because you feel like there's enough information there. However you want to approach that. So in this case, I'm gonna, since the surface is pretty symmetrical, but these are one solid mesh, I decided to keep these all together. But these legs, they could be totally symmetrical and it's not a big deal. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. And then I'm going to I'm going to flip it on the X, -1. And now I have the legs on the other side. And then I'm going to freeze transformations on this surface. Freeze transforms. And now you'll see that everything's been flipped accordingly. And if I go here and we take a look at this surface, the only thing we got to check now is to make sure that the normals are correct, and they should be. If we go here, you can see that I don't have two-sided shading on right now, so that means that the interior of these would be dark. And if you kind of cut in here, you could tell that they're dark, which tells us that the normals are in fact facing the right direction. But if you wanted to check the display normals, I actually made a little face normals toggle here, but you can go to display, polygons, face normals. And what that'll do is that will display, and now this is a big object, so that's why the normals look so small. So maybe I'll even help myself out further. I'll make the normal size a little larger. There we go. And you can see these are the normals, and this is the direction that they're facing, which is good. We want them facing away from the interior. And so if we go inside, you can see that there's little points. This is where each normal begins, but they're not actually pointing inward, they're pointing outward. So we're good. So I'll go ahead and turn that back off, and then we'll go ahead and go back to our texture. And so the next step is we're going to take all this geo here, and since we're going to bake this in Substance, we don't want overlapping geo, but it would be nice to see everything together. So in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and move all of this over to the next UDIM tile over. But when we build this in Substance, we're not going to use UDIM tiles. We'll only use their main 0 to 1 material mapping. So that way it will ignore this information and only use the information stored in this UDIM tile, which will allow us to have both of them in there at the same time, and it won't affect our bake. So here we go. Now you can see we have a finished ohm UV, and our layout is complete. And now we can move on to the texturing process. Go ahead and leave a comment if you have questions down below. This is only just one way to approach UVing. I'm not going to say it's the definitive way, but it is a way to get you through just about any kind of UV process, and it's a good way to do it pretty quickly. All right, thanks for watching.